Do you have a paranormal encounter you'd like to share with us? Send us an email with your story for a chance of it being featured on Weird World. In this collection of two genuine, intriguing tales of encounters with parallel universes follows Sophie Jones' bewildering interaction in 2018 with a supposed work colleague she has no memory of, who inexplicably possesses detailed information about her. Then experience Melanie's unsettling journey through her altered Connecticut neighbourhood in 2005, leading both to question the nature of their reality. Work colleague in another life. In 2018, Sophie Jones's ordinary life took a strange and unexpected turn. The 37-year-old accountant from suburban Seattle experienced an event that would challenge her understanding of reality. Sophie had always been a pragmatic, level-headed woman. Growing up in a middle-class family in Linwood, Washington, she had excelled in math and pursued a steady career in accounting. She'd been working at the same firm for over a decade, was close with her family, and enjoyed a small circle of long-time friends. Her life was comfortable and predictable until it wasn't. One evening, Sophie was dining at a local Italian restaurant with her mother Patricia and sister Rachel. Sophie heard someone call her name. Turning around, she saw a middle-aged woman approaching their table with a look of recognition. The woman, who introduced herself to her mother and sister as Margaret, began speaking to Sophie as if they were old colleagues. She mentioned a finance firm which Sophie had never heard of called RFG Financial Group, and recounted shared experiences that held no meaning for her. Margaret spoke of their boss, co-workers, and inside jokes, all of which were completely foreign to Sophie. Confused and uncomfortable, Sophie managed to stammer out an apology, explaining that she didn't know Margaret. To her surprise, Margaret's expression shifted from joy to bewilderment, then to hurt and confusion. Margaret, visibly shaken, apologised and retreated to her own table, casting occasional glances back at Sophie throughout the evening. The incident left Sophie deeply unsettled, her mind swirling with questions. How could Margaret have known her name? How did she know she was an accountant, or at the very least worked in finance? How could she have such vivid memories of shared experiences working together that had seemingly never happened? Was it some kind of elaborate prank set up by a friend or work colleague? If it was, they would never come to reveal it to her. As Margaret walked away, Sophie turned back to her family to see both Patricia and Rachel looking bewildered. "Who on earth was that?" Patricia asked her, her brow furrowed. "Sophie, are you feeling all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." Rachel also chimed in. "Do you know her from work? She seemed to know you really well. That was super awkward." Sophie's heart raced as she tried to process what had just happened. I really don't know her," she stammered. "I've never seen her before in my life. I have no idea how she knows me or why she thinks we work together." The rest of the dinner passed in a haze of speculation and worried glances. Sophie found herself unable to focus on the conversation, her mind replaying the bizarre encounter over and over again. Even as weeks passed, Sophie couldn't shake off the memory of that evening. She had looked up the firm Margaret had mentioned, RFG Financial Group, but could find no trace of any company by that name operating in the state of Washington. The incident began to affect Sophie mentally. She found herself second-guessing her memories, wondering if there were other parts of her life she had somehow forgotten. She became more withdrawn at work and more anxious in daily life, with it manifesting into obsessive habits. As observers of this strange tale, we're left to wonder, could Margaret have momentarily slipped into our universe from an alternative reality? A world where Sophie and Margaret had indeed worked together at RFG Financial Group. This would begin to explain Margaret's conviction, her detailed memories, and her knowledge of Sophie's name and profession. If so, what happened to Margaret? Did she return to her own reality as abruptly as she arrived in ours, left to puzzle over an encounter with a Sophie who didn't recognise her? Or is her mind permanently trapped in an altered version of her life? The same but not the same. In the summer of 2005, Melanie experienced something that would make her question everything she thought to be real. At 18 years old, she lived in a quiet neighbourhood in Connecticut, in the same house her family had moved into when she was just 3. Melanie's home was a 2-storey house with a steep driveway. Next to it ran a small stream, its gentle sounds a constant backdrop to her life. Since she was 14, Melanie had made it a habit to take daily walks in the nearby park. It was her time to think and be alone. In mid-July 2005, at around 1:30 in the afternoon, Melanie got ready for her usual walk. She slipped on her well-worn sneakers and reached for the front door, as she did every day. But the moment she stepped out onto the front porch, a wave of unease washed over her. Melanie looked around, confused. Everything appeared exactly as it always had. The large old tree in the front yard stood tall, its leaves rustling in the summer breeze. The neighbouring houses with their neat lawns were all in place. Yet something about it all felt profoundly wrong. She stood frozen on the porch, her eyes darting from one familiar sight to another. The stream, the tree, the driveway, everything was there, but it all felt off somehow. Melanie couldn't shake the feeling that she was looking at a completely different version of her neighbourhood. After a minute of attempting to quell her discomfort, Melanie told herself she was being silly. She took a deep breath and started to walk down the driveway. That's when things got even stranger. Mr. Grayson, their neighbour since the time they had moved in, was tending to his garden across the street. As Melanie reached the middle of her driveway, Mr. Grayson looked up. His reaction shocked her. His face went pale and his eyes widened as if he was seeing a ghost. Just as Mr. Grayson opened his mouth to speak, his expression a mix of disbelief and fear, Melanie experienced a sudden flash. In an instant, she found herself back inside her house, standing at the front door. Disoriented and shaken, Melanie tried to process what had just happened. The feeling of peculiarity that had permeated the outside world had vanished. Inside her home, everything felt glaringly normal. With trembling hands, she slowly opened the front door again. The scene that greeted her was entirely ordinary. The neighbourhood had returned to its usual state, without the unnerving atmosphere from moments before. Notably, Mr. Grayson was no longer in his garden. Still reeling from the experience, Melanie glanced at the clock in the hallway. To her shock, it read 1:26 p.m, the exact same time she had checked before stepping out. It was as if no time had passed at all, despite her vivid memory of the events outside. That night, Melanie found it nearly impossible to sleep. Her mind raced with questions and theories about what had happened. The next morning, bleary-eyed and exhausted, she confided in her parents. They listened with concern, but suggested that perhaps she had experienced a vivid daydream or a momentary lapse in perception due to the summer heat. A few days later, Melanie mustered the courage to approach Mr. Grayson while he was working in his garden. "Beautiful garden, Mr. Grayson," she said, trying to sound casual. "Were you out here gardening on Monday afternoon?" Mr. Grayson looked up, smiling warmly. "Oh, hello, Melanie. No, I don't think so. Monday was too hot for gardening. I spent most of the afternoon indoors." His friendly, normal demeanour only deepened the mystery for Melanie. In the years that followed, Melanie found herself reflecting on that bizarre summer day. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had momentarily slipped into some alternate version of the world, a version of her world that was subtly yet fundamentally different from her own. The look on Mr. Grayson's face haunted her, and she couldn't help but wonder, in that other reality, had something happened to her? Had she perhaps died or disappeared, explaining his shock at seeing her? The thought sent chills down her spine. Nearly 2 decades after that unsettling summer day, Melanie's life had moved on. She had graduated college, built a career, and started a family of her own. But the memory of that bizarre experience never truly left her. In 2023, while idly scrolling online one evening, Melanie stumbled upon an online community dedicated to what users called glitches in the matrix, strange, unexplainable experiences that seemed to defy the laws of reality. With a mix of curiosity and belonging, Melanie began reading through the posts. Her heart raced as she encountered story after story that echoed elements of her own experience. People described moments of time displacement and encountering alternate versions of familiar people and places with key yet subtle differences or details off. Soon Melanie had created an account and shared her story. Over the next few days, her post received several responses. Some users theorised that she had temporarily slipped into a parallel universe, a concept that both terrified and fascinated Melanie. Melanie's case also seems to incorporate elements of a time slip, given the fact that either no time seemed to pass during her experience, or time seemed to reset itself upon her experience coming to an end.